Imagine this. A country announces its free trade. Tariffs are low, imports should be flowing into the market, but suddenly something strange happens. Imported milk becomes scarce, cars from overseas disappear from the dealerships. While prices suddenly rise, consumers are confused. Tariff never increased. So what happened? The answer is something economists call non-tariff trade barriers. These are policies the government use to restrict international trade without raising tariffs. And in many cases, they are even more powerful than tariffs. Today, we will break down the most important types of non-tariff trade barriers. We will cover 5 key points: import quotas, quota versus tariff, domestic content requirements, and other non-tariff barriers such as government purchasing policies. Let's begin with one of the most common tools. An import quota is a physical limit on how much of a product can be imported during a specific time period. For example, a government might allow only 1 million liters of milk to be imported each year, or 20 million kilograms of rice. One limit is reached, no additional imports are allowed. This is very different from a tariff. A tariff increases the price of import, but a quota directly limits the quantity entering the country. Governments often enforce quotas using import licenses. Importers must obtain official permission that specifies exactly how much they are allowed to import. But this system creates problems. They must wait for approval. And sometimes licenses are distributed politically. Governments might sell them or give them to preferred companies, which can encourage lobbying and sometimes corruption. There are 2 main types of quotas: global quotas and selective quotas. A global quota limits the total amounts imported regardless of where the products come from. For example, a country might allow 30 million apples to be imported per year from any countries, but global quotas create practical problems. Importers rush to ship goods early in the year before the quota is filled. Those who arrive first capture the market. Those who arrive later may be completely shut out. Distant exporters are also disadvantaged because their shipping times are longer. To reduce these issues, many governments use selective quotas. A selective quota assigns specific import limits to particular countries. For example, 14 million apples from one country, 10 million from another, 6 million from another. Once the quota of each country is filled, imports from that country stop. Quotas also create another economic problem. They can encourage domestic monopolies. Domestic producers know foreign competitors cannot exceed the quota limits, so they face less competition. This gives domestic firms the ability to raise prices. Consumers end up paying more, which is one reason economists often criticize quota. Now let's compare quotas and tariffs. A tariff raises the price of imported goods, but it does not limit how many units can enter the country. If consumers are willing to pay the tariff, imports can continue indefinitely. A quota works differently. It imposes an absolute limit on the quantity imported. Once the quota is reached, imports stop completely. Even if consumers want more, even if they are willing to pay more, for this reason, quotas are usually more restrictive than tariffs. Tariffs still allow more market competition. Quotas remove that competition by limiting supply. Because quotas distort markets, many international agreements try to reduce their use. Members of the World Trade Organization have gradually replaced quotas with tariffs. This process is called tariffication. Tariffs are considered more transparent and easier to regulate. Another important non-tariff barrier is the domestic content requirement. Today, many products are made using global supply chains. Parts might be produced in several different countries and assembled somewhere else. Domestic content requirements limit this process. They require that a certain percentage of a product must be produced domestically. For example, a government might require 40% domestic content for automobiles. That means manufacturers must produce at least 40% of the car's value inside the country. Supporters say this protects jobs, but critics argue it forces companies to use higher cost domestic inputs instead of cheaper global resources, which ultimately raise prices for consumers. Consider a simple example. Suppose a car manufacturer is required to produce vehicles domestically. If domestic labor and materials are more expensive, the cost of producing the car increases. Consumers may pay thousands of dollars more for the same vehicle. Domestic workers gain income, but consumers lose purchasing power. Economists call this a redistribution of welfare from consumers to domestic producers. Governments also influence trade through subsidies. A subsidy is financial assistance given to producers by the government. Subsidies can take many forms: direct cash payments, tax reductions, low interest loans, or insurance guarantees. There are two major types: domestic subsidies and export subsidies. Domestic subsidies support industries that compete with imports. Export subsidies support industries that sell products overseas. By lowering production costs, subsidies allow domestic firms to sell goods at lower prices than their competitors. This strengthens their position in international markets. Finally, there are other non-tariff trade barriers. One important example is government procurement policy. Governments are some of the largest buyers of goods and services in any economy. Ideally, they would buy from the lowest cost supplier. But many governments prefer domestic companies. This is often called a binational policy. While it supports local industries, it also reduces competition, and it can increase costs for government projects, which ultimately means taxpayers pay more. So even when tariffs appear low, international trade may still be restricted through quotas, through domestic content rules, through subsidies, and through government purchasing policies. These are non-tariff trade barriers. They are less visible than tariff, but often they are even more powerful. Understanding these policies helps us see how governments shape global trade behind the scenes. And in international economics, the most powerful trade barriers are often the ones people don't notice. Thank you for your attention on this topic. If you have questions, examples, or thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments or discussion section.